So I was born and raised in Missouri. Um, I am the middle child. I have an older brother and younger brother. Uh, I'm currently a teacher, and I've been a teacher for about uh, 11 years now. Um, I've kind of traveled all over the U.S. doing that, kind of a way to get paid to see the country.
Mhm.
Um, I was one of the rare ones where I got diagnosed when I was 3 years old.
Mhm.
Was pretty young. It started off with my mom noticing that I wasn't developing speech correctly.
Mhm.
And so she ended up taking me to a children's hospital. And they had just, the doctor she took me to had just been to an Usher's convention.
Oh,
And
wow.
so after he looked at my audiogram, um, he said, this looks just like what I saw at the convention. And so I had a very, very early diagnosis.
Wow.
Um, so I've got severe hearing loss. And then, so I wear hearing aids in both ears and I rely a lot on lip reading.
Mhm.
I have Usher's type 2,
Mhm.
uh, and that was confirmed. My middle child had seizures when he was a baby, and so we did some genetic testing. And in that process, we were also able to do genetic testing for the Ushers and see exactly what I
And is it Usher type 2A, 2B? Do we know specific which subtype of the subtype?
had. I think it's 2A.
Okay. So you really got an early diagnosis, which you're right, especially, for those of us who are not, 20 years older or younger. For many of us who are older than 20, we have had a later diagnosis. So that's very interesting. What what has your experience been like in living with Usher syndrome? You said that you're a teacher,
I
and
am.
yeah, so how would you describe Usher syndrome as a part of your life now? Are you aware of it on an everyday basis? Does it influence everything you do in your life, or does it feel like it's just a part of who you are that's always kind of in the background?
Um, that's kind of a loaded question. Uh, since I was diagnosed at 3, I've always been aware, and my mom has always educated me on ushers.
Mhm.
Um, in college, I've done papers on ushers and retinitis pigmentosa just to make myself more aware and make others more aware. Um,
Mhm.
so at times I embrace it, at other times I avoid it.
Mhm.
I don't want to deal with it. This is my first year in this new school, and with the COVID going on, everybody wears masks, and I can't lip read.
Mhm.
So I had to be brave and send out an email to everybody and tell them, hey, I'm severely hearing impaired. I lip read. Please forgive me if I don't hear you.
Uh-huh.
Um, that's a hard pill for me to swallow. I
Uh-huh.
like to feel as normal as possible, and I like to be as independent as possible.
Mhm. So, Sarah, I so appreciate you saying that, because one of the common themes I have found with people who have Usher syndrome is this absolute fierce sense of independence, of not wanting to ask other people for help, of not wanting to have to recognize that they may need help. And certainly for all of us with Usher syndrome and people in general, having to deal with the mask situation during COVID has been a real challenge. So, what has that process been like for you in having to tell people that you don't hear well and so you may miss what they're saying? What has it been like to have to ask for help or recognize that you need help at times? Is that something that you continue to struggle with?
Yes, it is something I do really continue to struggle with, and
Mhm.
I don't honestly know why. Um, because when I do let people know, and when I do ask people for help, they are very helpful and they're very understanding and compassionate. Um, I think it kind of goes back to when I was in school and I got bullied a lot for my hearing,
Mhm.
and I got pulled out a lot for um, Like I received braille services and speech services. And so that was always kind of a stigma with me
Uh-huh.
growing up. And so I think that part kind of plays into me not asking for help near as much, just
Mhm.
because I don't want to bring it to the forefront,
Mhm.
even though people are very compassionate and understanding now.
Mhm. That's interesting. It's an interesting point you make because I think for many of us, when we do ask people for help and when we are able to get out of our own way, so to speak, we can find that it can be very relieving or helpful. But even just mustering the ability to ask someone can be such a challenge. So I so appreciate your saying that. So as a teacher, I'm curious to know what grade you teach, and are there ways in which, as a teacher, you have learned to adapt, or that your having Usher syndrome affects your teaching style? Do your students know that you have Usher syndrome? Is it something that doesn't come up because it doesn't necessarily affect you in the classroom? Tell me more about that.
That's one thing that I love with kids and why I love working with kids. Um, it's funny because with my kids, it's okay that they know that I wear hearing aids, and it's okay that they know that I need help hearing them sometimes. And they're not afraid to come up to me and say, "Mrs. Bailey, you didn't hear me."
Uh-huh.
And um, it's been a challenge in the classroom, especially with background noise. Um, but I've adapted really well, and my kids all adapt, and we all tend to work together on making everything work.
Mhm.
Um, as far as my teaching experience, this is actually my first year teaching a single grade level. My all my previous years, I have taught in multi-grade level classrooms.
Wow.
So in Montana, I taught kindergarten through eighth grade. Um, and then out in the bush, I taught kindergarten through fourth grade. So, and that's always around about 10 to 15 kids in the
Uh-huh.
classroom. Um, I don't ever really have the conversation with my students about having ushers because
Mhm.
they're younger, and so that's kind of a harder concept for them. But I
Mhm.
do talk to them about me having hearing aids and how hearing aids help me hear, just like glasses help us see. And
Uh-huh.
I normalize it all for them. And when they see me change out my hearing aid batteries, they're like, "Is your hearing aid going dead, Mrs. Bailey?" I'd be like,
Uh-huh.
"Yep." And so, just kind of help bring awareness to them and help normalize hearing losses for them because, especially the kids here in Alaska, they don't witness a lot of that.
Mhm. And what a unique opportunity, I think, to teach kids about just having different needs and to normalize that, I think, in a way that shows them that here's someone that I look up to as my teacher, that I rely on to learn from, and who also needs assistive technology to hear and can, use our help sometimes too to be able to enunciate or speak up so that you can hear them.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you have children.
Yes.
Was there any feeling or thought in your mind about whether or not you wanted to have children, or did you have concerns about having children because of Usher syndrome, or did you just always know that you wanted to be a mom no matter what?
It's got me a little teary eyed, that subject. So I always wanted kids.
Mhm. It's okay. Sarah, if you need to grab Kleenex, go grab them. We're here.
So having the diagnosis early on, we thought it would be um, a rapid progression of law.
Mhm.
Um, so growing up, I knew I always wanted kids,
Mhm.
but I always had the fear of not being able to see them.
Mhm. Mhm. It's okay.
I don't know why I'm getting so emotional.
Well, it's making me emotional because I get it and I really, really appreciate it. It's okay. This is real. This is what it's like to have Usher syndrome. Sarah, give yourself time. Go grab Kleenex.
So I always worried about passing it on
Mm-hmm.
to my kids because I don't want them to go through what I went through.
Mm-hmm.
But they have been an amazing blessing in my life, and I have been so very fortunate to have such good eyesight that I have right now,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to see my oldest son at 10,
Uh-huh.
to be able to see my youngest son at 22 months.
Uh-huh.
Um, and those are going to be memories. Those are going to be memories I'll always be able to keep.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, I so appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability, because this is what we all experience in our own ways, and we don't often have the opportunity to vocalize it and speak our biggest fears of living with vision loss and hearing loss. And I can tell you that I had to make the very difficult decision not to have children. And so I'm here with you. I'm weepy because I don't have kids, but I get it. And my crying for you comes because I so get it, and I appreciate your honesty. And I wish I could be with you to give you a huge hug. But I can tell you that we're in this together in our own ways, as separate as our lives are. And I live in New York City. So it couldn't be any more different than where you are in Alaska. Are you in Alaska?
Yeah.
When you said the bush, I was like, okay, well, she doesn't mean Africa. So tell me about what it's like to live in the bush, or tell me what it's like to live in Alaska, because there are definitely times of the year where you have more dark than you have light.
Yeah.
And there's also times when you have more light than you have dark. What has that experience been like for you?
It has been an amazing experience. I've lived right up along the Arctic Circle line, to where there's sunlight 24 hours a day.
Wow.
That's amazing because I can go out any time of day and I can still see everything because I'm
I mean,
so
that's like
screwed.
an Usher syndrome person's dream.
It is. It is. One of the really cool things about it being dark most of the time is to be able to see the stars here. I still get jealous of my husband and my kids when they go out and look at the stars and they're like, oh, it's just filled with stars. And I'm like, I see 5.
Right.
That's amazing. I see 5 stars. And to see the northern lights has been breathtaking here. I have a really, really good husband who is very supportive and protective of me. And when it gets a little too dark, he'll be like, Sarah, are you sure you can make it? If you're walking to school, you need to have your flashlight with you so you can see. So there's been challenges, but it's been so worth the adventure to come up here and experience all of this.
Absolutely. And Sarah, so you mentioned, I have something now in my eye, welcome to contacts and everything, right? But one of the things that you mentioned was recently having cataract surgery. And as someone who has just recently been going through the process of having my cataracts checked, having changes in my vision where I've had to make a decision whether or not to have cataract surgery now, whether or not to wait for, my cataracts to get worse to sort of, balance the risk and benefit. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience of going through the process of having your cataracts checked and making the decision to have the surgery, and how it's benefited you?
Yeah, living in a remote area, you don't necessarily have the resources to see a retinal specialist on a regular basis like you should.
Uh-huh.
Um, I had kind of lapsed in seeing a retinal specialist. It was like, I kind of got burned on the last one because he's like, you're going blind, right? It's like, yes, I do know. Thank you.
Right. And in your mind, that was the best way to talk to me about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And he's like, there's nothing more I can do for you. I don't know why you're here. And I'm just like, so that experience really burned me. And so I was like, I'm going to take a break from retinal specialists for a while. So I had originally thought 3 years ago that my RP was getting really bad, not cataract.
Uh-huh.
And so I thought, I am 31. I'm kind of at that age. I might have to start thinking about stopping teaching. And so my husband and I had talked it over, and we went down to the lower 48, and I saw a retinal specialist. And he said, your RP hasn't really changed much over the last 11 years. You have cataracts. And like hearing that I have cataracts was like the best thing in the world to hear. And apparently at that time, my cataracts were really bad.
Huh.
And so he's like, this is
you had cataracts before that?
I didn't have any cataracts before that, the last time I had seen a retinal specialist.
Uh-huh.
So I hadn't even thought about cataracts. And so he's like, once you get those removed, he goes, you can teach for more years to come, and you can drive for more years to come. And I was like, yay. So the decision to get cataracts removed was not a hard one, because I knew I'd be able to keep teaching.
And what has it been like since having cataract surgery?
It has been remarkable with being able to see what I can see. It's so much clearer. I feel like I kind of have a new lease on life with having my cataracts removed. I have to get used to reading glasses now, which I haven't been used to before, but it was well worth it for me.
Well, I wanted to ask you more about, for many of us who live with Usher syndrome and vision loss, this time of which we're sort of told that we would benefit from using a cane or assistive devices. I often find that there's often so much shame that people express in feeling in sort of having to come to terms with me using a cane, or feelings of fear, of not wanting to sort of be out in the world as someone with a disability, especially for people like us who have long hair. I have cochlear implants. You have hearing aids, we can cover them. People don't necessarily know. And to a certain extent, you could see having Usher syndrome at times as an invisible disability. But what are your thoughts about using a cane? And is that something that you do use? Is it something that you have strong feelings for or against? What has your experience been like?
So one of the things my mom did for me growing up was she enrolled me in summer camp at Missouri School for the Blind. And while there, I had orientation and mobility training. So yeah, I know how to use a cane. I absolutely hate the thought and concept of using one. Even me, and I hate saying this, even me as a person with a disability, a vision disability, I see someone with a cane, I notice them. They stand out. And it's like, I'm a shy person. I want to be a wallflower, and I don't want to stand out. So I know at some point I'm going to have to bite the bullet and use a cane or use a seeing eye dog or use some kind of assistive device to help me with that. But right now I drag my feet quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, a very common experience or feeling that so many people have. And what I appreciate most about what you just said is that even you, as someone with vision loss, seeing someone with a cane makes you feel a certain way. So if you feel this way, of knowing that they stand out, of feeling like it draws attention to them, it must make you feel like, well, how would other people see me if I were the person using a cane? And that is so honest and real.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you sharing that, because I think so many of us with Usher syndrome can relate to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and what was that like for you to go to a summer camp for the Missouri School for the Blind, to that camp for blind kids? Did you feel like you related to the kids there? Did you feel like, what the heck am I doing here? What was that experience like?
Yeah, I felt very at home there.
Uh-huh.
I felt like I could let my guard down
Uh-huh.
and I could really be me. And I knew no matter what, I wasn't going to be made fun of my hearing aids. I wasn't going to be made fun of accidentally bumping into things because I didn't see it there. It was an amazing experience. And I did learn a lot from there. I learned about um, how to make it through a daily life with no vision, how to cook with no vision, and
Uh-huh.
just being around those other kids and seeing those with worse vision or no vision, how they made it through the day and how they adapted. And it was such a learning experience for me, and I loved it.
Mm-hmm. So there was a normalcy there of vision loss wasn't what made you unique and different.
Right.
Yeah. Do you use some of the skills that you learned there many years ago still to this day? What are some of the skills that you still use or that you still employ or that have been most helpful to you?
Um, just using my finger to trace along the wall
Uh-huh.
to kind of help keep me in a path. Like if I'm walking down the dark hallway, just keeping my finger along the hall so I know where I am. Using my finger to measure how much water I'm pouring into a glass.
Uh-huh.
It's hard to see the water.
Mm-hmm.
Just stopping, taking a second, taking in the room around me, assessing where everything is before I start moving around.
Mm-hmm.
It's also, and then just making sure I have everything in the same place. And that's something I've been working on with my children and my husband, is put it back in the same spot so I know where it is and I don't have to go looking for it.
Mm-hmm. And how would you say that your living with Usher syndrome has impacted your kids, or how do they help you or adapt with you to both your vision and hearing loss? I have to imagine that, and I don't know how you are, there's so many of us with our hearing loss. I personally, at either at the end of the day or when I have an hour of time where I don't have to be doing anything else but getting work done on my own, the first thing I do is take my cochlear implants off. There is nothing I love more than my silence, and being able to tune everything out actually helps me really focus. But I also know people who take their hearing aids or their implants off at the very last moment of the day, that they don't like to be out of touch with sound. Where do you fall in all of that, and what has that experience been like for you, especially with having kids?
So my husband and I joke around a lot that he's more hearing impaired than I am, even though he has no hearing loss. Because I'm so much more sensitive to vibrations and
Uh-huh.
feeling sound. Um, when my boys were babies, he would stay sound asleep when my babies would start crying, and I would hear them without my hearing aids then and be like, okay, you're crying, I've got to take care of you. Um, so it's weird how like the mother instincts kind of kick in and they kind of amp up your awareness of things.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I wouldn't ever hear a baby crying. Um, I am one of those that leave my hearing aids in all day long, and then I take them out right before bed. But I am also one of those that love my peace and quiet. So when my boys do get rowdy, I turn my hearing aids off just to kind of have a little bit of silence, which is really nice.
So nice.
And my husband gets a little jealous of that sometimes. He goes, I wish I had hearing aids just so I could tune them out for a little while.
Yeah.
Yeah. My boys are really good about helping me out and being supportive. If I'm like, hey, you guys come here and help me. I can't see, or I dropped something. Can you help me find it? And they are really, really good about that.
Mm-hmm.
And they've grown up knowing that mommy's hearing aids are off limits. You're not allowed to touch them. Yeah. So it's been a really cool experience with them.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that each of them have very different ways that they handle your vision and hearing loss, or do they sort of all respond and react in the same way or help you similarly? Is there one who's more in tune than the other?
I think my oldest one is more in tune just because he's older and more mature. But they all handle it really well. I mean, that's all they've ever grown up with is all they know. Yep. And so it's just a normal way of life for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would imagine that having 3 boys, and what an age range too, right? Between a 22-month-old and a 10-year-old. I have 1 dog that's not even a guide dog, and that is like enough for me. First of all, I just want to give you tremendous credit because that's no easy feat for someone who is fully sighted and fully hearing, let's be clear. But I can imagine that there are probably a lot of humorous things, a lot of funny things that happen in your life, given that you have Usher syndrome or because of Usher syndrome. And I'm wondering if there are any things that sort of stick out in your mind that you think are worth sharing.
So just recently, a couple weeks ago, I have rechargeable hearing aids now, and I am still trying to get used to that. I've got to make sure the charger's plugged in, and I've got to make sure my hearing aids are plugged in and the lights are on. Mm-hmm. One night I forgot to do that. And so I woke up in the morning and I put my hearing aids in and there's no sound. I'm like, oh no. And so I take them off, I put them in the charger, realize it's unplugged. So then I go to my husband and I say, honey, my hearing aids are dead. I said, I cannot hear anything right now. And of course, I'm mom. I'm the one that takes care of everything and gets everything going in the morning. And so my boys are coming to me and they're like, Mom, this, Mom, that. And I'm like, boys, I cannot hear you. I said, my ears are not in. I cannot hear you at all. And so my oldest one is just yelling at me, Mom, can I have cereal? So then later in the day, once my hearing aids are charged, I put them back in and they're still yelling at me. And it's like, guys, I have my ears in. Quit yelling.
You know, what I really love about that story too is so many of us, without even realizing it, we say, you know, for instance, I don't have my ears in. Or we call our hearing aids or our cochlear implants our ears. Oftentimes people will call me and I see they're calling, but my ears are off. So I'll pick up the phone and I say, 1 second, I got to get my ears. And I found that so many of us say that. We call our assistive devices our ears because really they are. But it's always so funny when I hear someone else sort of use that term as I don't have my ears in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
there was another time when my oldest was, maybe about 2.5, 3 years old. And I was driving him and he was in the back seat. And, I was talking to him about something and he wasn't listening. I said, Shane, are you listening to me? He goes, no, Mom, my batteries and my hearing aid are dead. I can't hear you.
And he doesn't wear hearing aids.
He doesn't wear hearing aids. I said, that doesn't work for you, buddy. I said, your ears will be fine.
That is so funny. You must have died laughing.
Oh, I did. It was hard to keep a straight face.
Yeah. So how is navigating and getting around where you live? Is it, do you have to rely on driving primarily? And, I know that for me, I'm 41 now. I stopped driving. I have Usher type 3A. And I stopped driving probably around 28 years old. Part of why I live in New York City is I am actually very much an outdoorsy person. Was born and raised in California. And knowing that I would have to give up driving, first of all, I love driving. It was my ticket to independence. I was a good driver, if I do say so myself. But I also knew that I was going to have to give it up at some point, and I did not want to live somewhere. This was before Uber and Lyft. And so part of why I moved to New York City was for graduate school, but also to live somewhere where most people didn't drive. What is transportation like where you live, and what are your feelings about, I feel like driving and that whole issue around having Usher syndrome and driving is such a sensitive and personal subject. What are your thoughts about it?
So where I live currently, I do drive, and uh, I'm not always the best driver because I've got some blind spots in my vision, and so I'm a lot more cautious.
Uh-huh.
But sometimes there are things that pop up that I don't notice that my husband's like, "Did you just see that?" I'm like, no. um, but I am a very cautious driver.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up as a teenager, I had a very early onset of night blindness, and
Uh-huh.
so like driving at night has always been out of the question.
Uh-huh.
And as a teenager, I hated that because that was like the cool thing to do was to drive at night and go hang out. Um, I feel really lucky that I can still drive because that's a piece of my independence still.
Uh-huh.
And around here, you've got to drive. It's not like a short little 5-minute walk, and the weather conditions aren't always um, appropriate for walking.
Uh-huh.
So,
Do you have anything right now that you are really working towards or looking forward to? I know that we've been in the middle of COVID, so it's felt a bit like a standstill. But you have 3 boys, and I can only imagine the constant changes that you're dealing with them and growing up and parenting them. What are some of the things that you're looking forward to, that you're even working towards?
um, well, you mentioned COVID. The first thing I'm really looking forward to is no masks. That'd be nice. um, what I'm really looking forward to is just watching my boys be able to grow up. Um,
Mhm.
Hopefully, maybe to see my youngest graduate high school and go through college. That'd be a dream.
Mhm.
That's kind of a stretch there, but I'll take what I can get.
Mhm.
Um, and just being able to live every day to the fullest, to hopefully keep teaching for another 5-10 years.
Mhm.
Maybe at that point somehow figure out how a blind and hearing impaired teacher can be in the public education uh,
Mhm.
as a teacher. I really want to figure out a way to do that. I think it's important to somehow show the world that, yeah, a deaf blind teacher can be a regular teacher.
Mhm. Mhm. And with your boys and the constant chaos, I imagine, of your household, are there things that you guys have, like oftentimes people will have, even if they don't know or use sign language, they have home signs or they have these special things they do at home that were sort of created because of just the nature of your family and how you communicate. Are those things that you guys have created in your household?
Yeah. A lot of times I'll go like this. And my
Uh-huh.
boys know right away. They're like, "Oh, mom can't hear me."
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So then they'll like come closer so I can see their lips, and then they'll talk to me, and I'll be like, "Okay, I can hear you now."
Yeah, it's funny that there's all these little things that we sort of learn and also recognize that we all do in our households that never even occurred to us because they're just so second nature.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that having Usher syndrome has impacted the way that you live your life? Do you look at the world differently? Do you experience the world differently? Do you feel any differently you think than maybe you would if you didn't live with Usher syndrome?
I most definitely think Usher syndrome has kind of made me more aware of my surroundings, made me more appreciative.
Uh-huh.
Um, I love watching the seasons change because I can see it. I can witness it. I love looking at wildlife and animals and people and just I have a very artistic nature and I like to paint and to be able to see all of those values and richness in everything.
Uh-huh.
Having ushers has made that much more important to me
Mm-hmm.
because I know it's a limited time.
Mm-hmm. So it's really given you a much greater sense of appreciation that you can still see these things.
Yes.
Yeah, I get that. So how would you advise someone who's recently been diagnosed with Usher syndrome? And by the way, I hate this question. I hate myself for asking the question, and yet I do find that people really do oftentimes share things that can be helpful to either families who have a child or a parent who's been diagnosed with Usher syndrome. Are there things that you would advise or that you would share with other people who have Usher syndrome, who are developing comfort, who are coming to terms with their sort of ever-changing circumstances?
Yeah. It's okay to be angry at it.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to cry over it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but don't give up.
Mm-hmm.
When I was little and we found out I had ushers, they said there's no cure.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's so much research going on. It's unbelievable. And it's like there's hope.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't ever give up because there may be a light at the end of the tunnel. And you may be lucky and fortunate to keep your vision a lot longer than they say you are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and to just appreciate every moment and everything that you see and you have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, I was told I would be blind about 11 years ago. So even having the 10 some odd degrees of vision that I have, my central vision, and even with my cataracts, it's amazing to me how when I see some things, how appreciative I feel, the relief I feel in still being able to see it. Amidst all the frustration I feel of the things that I can't see or just struggling to see things I once used to be able to not even have to think about. Um, I really appreciate it. And so I so understand what you're saying. It really resonates with me. Yeah. Sarah, I truly cannot thank you enough for taking the time to speak with me and with us today. And I feel such a kindred spirit in you. I feel like I wish we lived closer so that we could be able to even walk and visit each other, even if it was socially distanced. And so I would love to keep in touch with you. And I just can't thank you enough for your honesty and your vulnerability. And you have the most beautiful smile. So it's just been really a pleasure to speak with you today. And I want to ask you one last question because you brought up something that I think so many of us have experienced. You said that when you saw this retinal specialist, however many years ago, that he basically said, well, you're going blind and there's nothing I can do for you, so I'm not even sure why you're here, or whatever the message was that you heard or you received. And I think for many of us, that's our biggest fear, nightmare, is having a clinician like that. So I often ask people who have Usher syndrome or any type of retinal degenerative condition, what would you want clinicians to know in terms of how they work with people with Usher syndrome? What are things that could be useful for them to keep in mind or to employ when they're meeting with someone, with a patient who has vision loss, who has Usher syndrome?
Uh, I would want them to be compassionate, to, most people, when they get a diagnosis, they educate themselves.
Uh-huh.
So oftentimes I would get, if it was a new retinal specialist, they would treat me like I didn't know anything.
Uh-huh.
Um, and just, you know, I'm not any less of a person
Mhm.
because I have this diagnosis.
Mhm.
And I've had awesome retinal specialists. I have. Um, and he, treated me as an equal. Like, hey, this is what we're looking at. This is what we're seeing. And he filled me in. He'd say, this is what your retina looks like. This is your blind spot. This is
Mhm.
how much peripheral vision you have.
Mhm.
Versus just leaving me in the dark is not okay.
Mhm. Mhm. I think it's so helpful to be able to have a clinician who can treat you like a human being, like a person, and not just a patient or a clinical case. Because I know that many of us have experienced that, and it does not feel good. And more importantly, what I so appreciate about what you shared in terms of a message you would want to pass on to other people with Usher syndrome or who have been recently diagnosed is this idea of having hope. Because I think when you live with this type of condition or with any adversity in your life, that it's very difficult to maintain an upbeat attitude without having hope. So I think hope is such a crucial piece of this living with Usher syndrome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, absolutely.